Good morning. Good morning from the Bullock County Historical Society and also from the Hideway on historic Savannah Avenue right here in Statesboro. Our recent tidbits are delving into the fascinating history of St. Simon's Island. The first part dealt with the geography and the early natives, Fort Frederica, and Christ Church. The second part will research into the 14 plantations that used slave labor to become one of the richest places in the United States, and the first Freedom March on Ebo Landing. We will conclude in the third part with the building of the Causeway, Tourist, and the Grand Hotels. Today, part 2, Plantations, Slaves, and the Lighthouse. Following the American Revolution, Fort Frederica was obsolete. The island turned to agriculture after acres of live oak trees were cleared for farmland. The timber was used in building American warships, including the famous USS Constitution, which we know as Old Ironsides. St. Simon was known for its production of long staple cotton, which soon came to be known as Sea Island cotton. Cotton proved to be a very lucrative crop, and the slave population in Georgia provided the cheap labor. By the early 1800s, a plantation society flourished on St. Simon's Island. There were 14 plantations of note, and these are them. Cannon's Point, owned by John Cooper. Hampton, owned by Major Pierce Butler. He was a doozy. Pikes, owned by Dr. Thomas Hazard. Kelvin Grove owned the Thomas Plantation. West Point was owned by William Hazard. Lawrence, owned by Captain John Frazier. Longview, owned by the McNish family. Oatlands, owned by Dr. Grant. Sinclair, owned by Dr. William Frazier. These are the same Fraziers that later developed Hilton Head. The Village, owned by Captain Alexander Wiley. Harrington Hall and Mulberry Grove were owned by Captain Raymond Emery. And Retreat was owned by Major William Page. The oaks from Retreat Plantation still line the drive to the Sea Island Golf Club. Hamilton Plantation was owned by James Hamilton. There is no finer example of a wealthy planter that profited on the backs of others than James Hamilton. He arrived from Scotland during the Revolutionary War along with fellow Scotsman and St. Simon's planter John Cooper. Hamilton's estate would become to epitomize the luxury and the affluence attained by the elite of the antebellum period. He had a 2-story frame house fronting on the Frederica River. It had sturdy colonial lines on high lattice foundations and a wide piazza. Spacious gardens and broad lawns surrounded the plantation house. He grew Sea Island cotton on some 2,000 acres. This piece of land is now our beloved Epworth by the Sea. The Methodist Church purchased 83 of these 2,000 acres of land on October the 29th, 1949. Oh, the wonderful summer camps I went to at Epworth. I guess the most infamous plantation and slave owner is Pierce Butler. Hampton Point on the northern end of the island cultivated 800 acres of cotton and worked more than 500 enslaved people. His Butler's grandson, Pierce Meese Butler, was responsible for the largest sale of human beings in the history of the United States. He squandered the fortune he inherited and had to sell 429 slaves for around $100 each which provided him with around $300,000. I just can't imagine it. It makes me sick to even read it. The first Freedom March in the United States of America was on Ebo Landing in Dunbar Creek, which is on St. Simon's Island. I'm sure you didn't know that. It was the place of a mass suicide in 1803 of Africans taken from their homeland in present-day Nigeria who had taken control of their slave ship and refused to submit to slavery. In May of 1803, these slaves, who had survived the Middle Passage, landed in Savannah and were auctioned off at one of the local slave markets. These Igbo Africans were known for being fiercely independent. The group of 75 people were bought by John Cooper and Thomas Spalding for use on their plantations on St. Simon's. They sold for $100 each. The slaves were chained and packed under the deck of a small vessel named the schooner York, and they were shipped from Savannah to St. Simon's. During the voyage, the slaves rose up in rebellion and took control of the ship and then drowned their captors. However, in the process, the ship was grounded in Dunbar Creek, right on the side of St. Simon's Island. The Africans went ashore, and then under the direction of the high Igbo chief with them, walked into the creek singing in their own language, "The water spirit brought us, the water spirit will take us home." They chose death over the alternative of slavery. So you see, the first major act of resistance of Africans in the history of America was right here on our shores of Georgia. Another legend that I love that arose from this event on Dunbar Creek is the legend of the Flying Africans. This is told recently in Toni Morrison's novel, Song of Solomon, that we're all familiar with, and of course Alex Haley in his book Roots. In this story, the Africans are reputed to have grown wings and turned into vultures before flying back home to their native land of Africa and to freedom. The stories differ slightly in nuance, but all of them attest to the courage and rebellion displayed by the enslaved Igbo Africans. The first lighthouse on St. Simon's Island was built by John Cooper in 1804. He owned Cannon's Point Plantation, and he deeded 4 acres of land at the southern end of St. Simon's to the federal government as the site for the lighthouse. President James Madison appointed Gould to serve as the first keeper of the lighthouse at an annual salary of $400. It was octagonal in shape, 75 feet tall, and constructed of tabby, except for the very uppermost part had a few bricks. The first light was an oil lantern fueled with whale oil. The Confederate Army blew up this lighthouse to keep it from becoming a Union stronghold. The current lighthouse on St. Simon's, which we all love, was built in 1872 and designed by architect Charles Kluske. The tower is 104 feet tall and has 129 cast iron steps, and adjacent keeper's house. It is made of my absolute favorite, Savannah gray brick. Kluske and some of his crew never saw the fruition of their efforts. They died of malaria in 1871 before the lighthouse was completed. This marked the beginning of St. Simon's tourist industry. Around the lighthouse, the island became a summer retreat for families from the nearby mainland. Thanks for sharing time with me today. Bye.